In an overnight operation that shocked the world, the U.S. military launched an air, land, and sea attack in the capital of Venezuela that resulted in the capture of the country's sitting leader and his wife. President Trump characterized the mission, dubbed Operation Absolute Resolve, as a, quote, assault like people have not seen since World War II that is meant to bring, quote, outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. A new 25-page indictment, unsealed after Maduro was in U.S. custody, revealed he faces drug, narcoterrorism, and weapons charges. Attorney General Pam Bondi described both Maduro and his wife, who was named as a co-defendant in the indictment, as, quote, two alleged international narco-traffickers who will, quote, soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. In his first court appearance on Monday, Maduro pleaded not guilty, vowing he was innocent and still the president of Venezuela. Criminal defense attorney Skye Lazaro joins Forbes True Crime to discuss the United States' case against Maduro. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is criminal defense attorney Skye Lazaro. Skye, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany. Always glad to be with you.
In a really stunning middle-of-the-night operation over the weekend, Venezuela's sitting leader, Nicolás Maduro, along with his wife, were captured by U.S. forces in a Caracas military compound. He's currently being held in New York City, where he faces drug, narcoterrorism, and weapons charges. First of all, from the perspective of a defense attorney, you wake up to this really shocking news. What's your reaction? What do you make of it?
This is not something that we see very often. I think this is a little bit shocking or out of the norm to see someone who is seemingly a sitting official in a foreign government be detained and removed to the United States. Not that it hasn't happened before, but it is not something that, we see, day by day.
I want to talk about what exactly was laid out in this 25-page superseding indictment that was unsealed shortly after Maduro was in U.S. custody. And it expanded on the 2020 indictment against Maduro, has the same charges against him, but there are new details. So when you're reading this, what stuck out to you?
The United States went through a pretty comprehensive list of what they were relying on as far as facts or their perceived theory of this case in laying out this indictment. They went through, essentially a 2-decade span of time talking about different things that had happened. I think it's somewhat clear from the indictment that there are some potentially cooperating witnesses in this regarding some of the information, some confidential informants, things along those lines. So, it is very detailed. It's 25 pages. This isn't just a boilerplate. We brought them back and we're charging them. They did go through the process of laying out the information that they have, at least, in terms of generally to suffice for a complaint or an indictment in this case.
To that point, in this indictment, there are certain details about what seemingly seemed like private conversations, certain meetings, different flights that would lead one to believe, who read it, I read the entire indictment, it made me believe at least, and you obviously as well, that there were some cooperating witnesses here. How strong is that evidence when someone cooperates?
It can go both ways. It depends on who you have as a cooperating witness. There's always credibility problems when you have cooperating witnesses who have been previously indicted or previously convicted or given a plea deal to testify against someone at trial. That is, that's always going to come up to question their credibility. The other aspect of it is who are these people? Are they going to stay cooperative? Are they going to come back to the United States and testify? I would assume if the United States is relying on them in their indictment that they are, at least pretty confident that will happen. But really, I think the biggest issues when you start looking at cooperators is who are they? Do we have credibility problems that can be overcome where somebody doesn't just look at it and say, hey, look, you're just throwing your friend under the bus to save yourself.
I want to get into the exact charges here. This is what Maduro faces: narcoterrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. When you look at that, what's the most serious to you?
The most serious is the narcoterrorism charge. It carries a potential penalty of 20 years up to life in prison. There's aggravating factors that can be attached to that, whether or not there was serious bodily injury or a loss of life, things along those lines. And then the weapons charges are essentially enhancement charges. So those run consecutive to anything else and just can add time on. But really, I think the most serious of these, when you're looking in terms of potential time in prison, is the terrorism charge. The conspiracy to bring cocaine into the country, is a 10-year to life. So both of those carry a maximum possibility of life in prison. If he's convicted or if they are convicted, these counts can be run consecutive to each other. So you could be looking at multiple life sentences on top of it.
And I want to talk about something else that the indictment alleges. It alleges that Maduro, he gave passports, Venezuelan passports, to drug traffickers, diplomatic passports. It also alleges that the couple, Maduro and his wife, maintained their own groups of state-sponsored gangs known as colectivos to facilitate and protect their drug trafficking operation, and they also ordered kidnappings, beatings, and murders against those who owed them drug money or otherwise undermined their drug trafficking operation, including ordering the murder of a local drug boss in Caracas, Venezuela. I didn't see murder on this indictment, aside from talking about that. I mean, that wasn't one of the charges here. So how can they list but that not be a charge?
So they can use other information within this. Like I touched on a little bit before, if there is serious bodily injury or a loss of life or murder, that can enhance what those penalties could be. So the purpose of including all of those types of facts in the indictment is to say, not this isn't a 20-year prison case. This is a potential, life in prison case or multiple life sentence case because of these other acts, even though they're not charged.
And I know, at least for me, I woke up on Saturday morning, just shocked at this news. It really, truly is historic. I was deep into my winter break, cracked open the laptop. I'm pretty sure that's what everyone in the news business was doing on Saturday. That's just how big this story was. But in your opinion, as a defense attorney, how airtight does a case need to be where there's this stealthy, very coordinated military operation in a different country to go extract the sitting leader of that country and bring them back to the United States to face charges? I'm assuming that can't be a flimsy case.
No, and like you, I think all of us in the legal community were equally as shocked by this. I've been involved in cases that involve foreign jurisdictions and people being prosecuted in foreign places or being brought back to the United States. Really, what's interesting about this case is most of the acts contained in the complaint are things that happened outside of the United States. So we're talking about acts in other countries. We're talking about money in other countries and assets and these things being ordered from other countries. And really, the end target of it was cocaine being brought into the United States. That's our basis for it. I think the United States is going to have a lot to overcome in this case. I think, defense counsel in this case is going to first and foremost, attack whether or not they could be arrested and brought back here, first of all, and whether or not there's jurisdiction here in the United States that attaches to be able to do this before we ever get to the underlying merits of what they're being charged with and the elements of those crimes. And so I think we're going to see a lot of litigation in this case related to those two things as we go on before we ever get to did they or did they not do it. But I would think the United States is going to have a pretty buttoned up case on all fronts and have a legal basis in order to, one, bring the indictment, and two, arrest them the way that they did.
And I think that was one of the first questions that a lot of people woke up with after the initial shock of this news wore off was, is this even legal? What does that really look like? What do you think is the biggest hurdle that the United States has to overcome in this case?
First of all, although the United States is not acknowledging it, other countries have that he was the sitting leader of another country. With that comes some sense of head of state immunity. They're going to have to overcome that. And from my review of what's out there, there hasn't been any white papers or any sort of legal basis released by the United States to justify them going there, to arrest them the way that they did, and charge them with crimes that largely, the facts contained in, like I said, the facts contained in this indictment largely happened outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. That doesn't mean the United States can't uh, criminally charge or indict or prosecute people for those acts, but it does add an additional hurdle that they need to get over.
And to that point, the 2018 election in Venezuela, along with the 2024 election in Venezuela, are widely viewed as shams, as fraudulent, as illegitimate. But in 2025, at the beginning of 2025, Maduro was still sworn in. So while we don't recognize Maduro as the president of Venezuela, he still was sworn in there. And in the indictment, it says that he was the de facto but illegitimate ruler of the country. I mean, how strong is the how strong is the argument against head of state immunity, do you think?
I think that's going to be a tough one for the United States. I think they acknowledge that yes, he was sworn in, and whether or not we think he was legitimate or not, that's a legal question. I think that's going to have to be answered by a judge, and that's one I think that's going to be litigated pretty heatedly from both the defense and the state, because if they can't get past that, I think that this indictment probably fails altogether.
And then on the flip side, too, President Trump has talked before in the past few days about the economic opportunities that this could bring for the United States, the profits that could be made from from the country's oil, the fact that there's going to be businesses going into the country working with the oil. I mean, could Maduro and his team use that against the United States' case and say, hey, this case was brought against me for some ulterior motives here?
Certainly, and without getting in the political weeds on this, which this case opens up an entire Pandora's box of what we should or shouldn't do. But from a legal perspective, really, that's problematic, I think, for the United States to be making statements like that for the very reason you just stated. Was this really about what's contained in the indictment and we're going after bad people and this is what we're going to do and we're going to prosecute them? Or was there some other political or financial motive involved? And if there was, I think that undercuts, at least the United States motivation in this case, which could be problematic, I think, for the United States prosecution in this. Really, what you want to do if you file a case like this that, has all these legal landmines, for lack of a better word, you want to keep it to the facts of the case and not make it about something else or the potential of it being about something else. Because then I think you end up in this situation where you're not even really, it's not really relevant to the facts. But it does undermine why the United States is doing it and could potentially not only cause us problems in this case, but there's going to be international law, I think, that comes into play largely in this case. And the United States motives are likely going to be questioned when they're looking at, was the United States right in doing this?
And to that point, once you add international law, once you add a foreign leader here, I mean, just how complicated is this case? I'm assuming that this is not going to be wrapped up anytime soon.
No, I would not think this case is going to go quickly because I think there are so many moving parts. This is probably one of the most, I would say, this is probably one of the most difficult cases, that you could file to try to prosecute because of the interplay in all of it. And we've prosecuted foreigners in the past under Foreign Corrupt Practice Act cases and things along those lines. But the way that those cases came about and the way those people were apprehended, usually it was on United States soil. We were talking about something that involved, people in the United States and acts that happen in the United States. And so this case really just is layer upon layer of difficulty because of that. And I think, once you start involving, international law and what countries can and can't do to other countries and other rulers, we open up something that may have to be resolved long before we ever get to whether or not we can prosecute them here.
There are other co-defendants on this indictment aside from Maduro and his wife, including Maduro's son, the Minister of the Interior in Venezuela, the alleged head of the Trinidad gang. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked over the weekend why the United States didn't grab all of these co-defendants while grabbing Maduro as well as his wife. And he said we couldn't just, sweep up 5 other people. This was a highly coordinated attack, essentially, is what he said. We got the top priority and we couldn't suck up more, is essentially what he said, that this was a sophisticated and frankly complicated operation. But since the top priority, according to Marco Rubio, was captured, do you think that the United States is going to continue to search and look after and try to obtain the other co-defendants here?
Potentially, but I think their top priority, who they apprehended, I think was who they were after for reasons outside of this indictment that have been stated. So yes, maybe, or maybe they'll wait until they, if they ever come to US soil, try to apprehend them. But we see this in other drug cases that are filed in federal court where people are charged and they live in different countries, and those indictments sit out there forever, and they might have other co-defendants who are prosecuted along the way. But I think in this case, I think it's pretty clear that Maduro Moros was the target in this, both he and his wife. Otherwise, they would have gotten everybody all at once. I don't think going in there with another military type operation is likely, although, that may change in time as well.
And Maduro made his first federal court appearance on Monday. He pleaded not guilty. He said that he's innocent. He also reportedly said he's a decent man and he's still president of Venezuela. What are you looking out for next here?
I think what we're going to see are challenges to jurisdiction and the arrest, first of all, whether or not he's even should be legally here in the country, whether or not this indictment passes constitutional muster as far as jurisdiction, and then, how international law plays into it. I think those will probably be the next steps. I don't know that we're going to see the traditional detention type hearing or argument that would normally be made. I really think this is going to turn on jurisdiction, the arrest, and then international law before we see anything else.
Skye, I really appreciate your insight here, your expertise. As we see more developments here, as well as other cases, I hope you can come back on and break them down with me. Thanks so much for the time.
Yep, always love being with you.